There's a whole bunch of other reasons why the disappointment and disillusionment happen. But I think it's also really good to know that even that is part of the awakening process, and people tend to abandon basically spirituality and inquiry altogether, and that often tends to be actually a really great thing to do and really beneficial. I can certainly relate to the disillusionment and the disappointment with transcendence of any kind, which, even though it was such a painful experience, it actually led to meeting my human experience fully, and that was the start of all kinds of other profound shifts. Hi everyone, and welcome to new subscribers to the channel. It's really nice to see you here. It's such a lovely sunny day, blue skies, full on spring, that I literally had a need to share it with you because the situation was very different for the past few days, just really cold and rainy and windy. So it's a real nice change. So that's it as far as the weather update. As always, I like to ask that if you enjoy this video and if you'd like to support the channel, then please remember to like the video, to subscribe, and to share in the comments what resonates with you. The other thing I wanted to say has to do with an online gathering that will be happening this month, the last weekend of April, both Saturday and Sunday, April 25th and 26th. And I send the details, the information about it to the people who are on my mailing list. If you haven't received an email about it, then please make sure to check your spam and look for email from either Maggie-Humanizing Awakening or Humanizing Awakening. And if you are interested in this online gathering, but you're not on the mailing list, then you can sign up via my website, or you can simply email me at humanizingawakening@gmail.com, and I will send you all the details. And if you don't want to join this month, or for whatever reason you can't make it, then there will be other gatherings organized in the future. So if you are interested, again, let me know and I will let you know when those events take place. So today I want to talk about something that's actually very common, to the point that it is seen as a sort of expected part of the awakening process. And I'm talking about a sort of a disappointment or disillusionment with awakening, with transcendence, with spirituality altogether, which comes after a profound insight or profound awakening. And I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of people that I've worked with, that I hear from, have had that experience. This is why I'm saying it's actually really common. And there are all kinds of reasons as to why this disillusionment, this disappointment happens. And I want to talk a little bit about just some of them. So for many people, the first awakening, the first glimpse, the first insight can be incredibly liberating. And it comes with all kinds of feelings of lightness, of joy, of this unconditional peace, and well-being, and sort of and liberation, and many people will describe it in their own way, but either way it is a wonderful experience. It's a really lovely feeling. And so this is one of the reasons why the period following this kind of an insight, this first awakening, is often referred to as the honeymoon period. So when that honeymoon period comes to an end, and not only that it comes to an end, but we kind of find ourselves sort of back to square one and struggling again, that's when that disappointment can be felt. And it can come as quite of a shock, alongside all kinds of confusion as to what happened, and that feeling that what was seen was lost. Another reason why this disappointment happens is because there was this innocent expectation that that feeling that came with the insight, with the shift, was going to basically last forever. And if that honeymoon period lasts for a really long time, like it was certainly the case here, then it can really come as a shock when it comes to an end. And not only that we're sort of back to square one, but we may be feeling even more confused, depressed, and actually struggling even more than we had before the first awakening, before that first insight. And so this is also where it's really, really common to try to do something to get back to that feeling, try to recreate it so we could experience it again. And then there is this kind of association that's made, whether we're aware of it or not, where we equate all those lovely, expansive, wonderful feelings with transcendence, with awakening, with the formless, and anything that's the opposite of that, the anything challenging, anything uncomfortable, anything to do with form is sort of pushed away, and there's resistance to it. And so this is where the sense of separation actually becomes even stronger, and we find ourselves sort of at odds with the human experience, with the day-to-day situations and challenges. This is where it is really useful to know about the awakening process, that there are different kinds of insights, that there are different kinds of shifts, that there are things that we experience in between which are really not pleasant, like all the dark nights and the sort of terror, the existential terror, the confusion, and so on. While knowing that might not make things easier, but to actually know that can be really helpful. This is why I make a distinction, a very simple distinction in my book between awakenings and awakening, what I call awakening with capital A. So the awakenings are basically all kinds of profound insights and glimpses. They usually don't last. And this has nothing to do with any kind of hierarchy of specialness or importance, because even the sort of fleeting glimpses or insights, they are equally valuable. I see them a bit like previews. And the awakening that includes all those shifts, expanded states of consciousness, and all kinds of experiences, like experience of unity, experience of emptiness, experience of nothingness. But the what I call the awakening with capital A is a sort of a different ballpark, especially in the sense that it's not really a state of expanded consciousness, and it's not something that comes and goes, and there is no possibility of attaining it or losing it or anything like that, which is why there's pretty much nothing that can be said about it, and why it cannot actually be even described. So again, when we know that certain shifts and experiences won't last, or the feelings that come with those experiences won't last, then we may still feel a bit of disappointment, but it's not going to be as great, because we kind of know that from the get-go. We know that from the start that this is something to be expected. But what can also create a massive disappointment and disillusionment is when we have this profound awakening. It shifts the way we perceive ourselves. It shifts the way we perceive the reality. It feels incredibly liberating. All the issues that we kind of were dealing with, all the reasons why we suffered, they don't seem to be there anymore. It really can feel like all the issues that looked like big problems have been sort of wiped out and are no longer there. And that can actually last from anything like one day, to weeks, to days, and even months. So it really comes again as a shock and a massive disappointment when not only that feeling goes, but all kinds of new stuff now comes up to the surface. All kinds of shadowy stuff, the so-called shadowy material, basically stuff that's been suppressed, repressed, stuff that we didn't even know was there. All kinds of painful memories or traumas or wounds, all kinds of patterns, all kinds of coping mechanisms are now all that stuff sort of becomes illuminated. And now we are dealing with a whole bunch of new stuff that, like I said, we didn't even know was there before. Because again, if we don't know that this too is very much part of the process, and that actually not only the first awakening, but the awakenings that follow really each one will illuminate something else, will bring something else to the surface, then when we know that this is to be expected, again, it might not make it easier to go through that, but at least we know that this is something to be expected. And all that needs to happen in those moments is that the stuff that comes up to light, the stuff that resurfaces, simply wants to be met. And yet, what tends to happen in those moments, there is like a really strong resistance to the discomfort. And especially after a really profound insight into the empty nature of self or the no self, when this stuff comes up to the surface, there's a tendency to hide in the absolute, hide in that emptiness, and dismiss every experience, every emotion, every sensation as just empty or just an illusion or whatever. It doesn't matter. No one's having those emotions. No one is having an experience. No one is struggling and blah, 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 blah. And so there's a tendency to then basically hold on to that emptiness, hold on to the absolute, hide in there and push away anything that is uncomfortable. So the hiding in the emptiness becomes a coping mechanism. It's the way to avoid basically experiencing the emotional discomfort, especially. And I would say that especially after that insight into the empty nature of self or no self or the empty nature of reality, there can be a real sense of not just like disappointment, but confusion and disorientation, especially when that insight is treated as an arrival point, as an end point, you see? And when we don't know that the insight into the empty nature of self or no self is really just the beginning of the process of dismantling of that identity structure, which is why so many of us will end up after this profound insight, completely disoriented, completely confused, and it can feel really wobbly. This is when all the other kind of more extreme experiences, more scary experiences like the existential terror, the dark void, all that stuff, that can be really destabilizing and scary, are very common. Generally speaking, the disappointment can follow, especially when we sort of treat the first awakening as the end point, as the arrival point, which by the way, is very common for all kinds of reasons. Either because we don't have a knowledge about the awakening process, we don't know that there are more insights to be had, that there are different stages and so on, or because when we listen to teachers and they talk about the nature of reality and so on, and we can sort of totally relate to what they're saying in direct experience, then the conclusion is, well, I've seen what they saw, and that's the game. That's game over. That there's nothing else to see. There's nothing else to be experienced. So again, this can come as a surprise when after some time there's a whole bunch of other stuff that starts happening, and that can get either disappointing or confusing, especially if we thought that we have already arrived, so to speak. And this is slightly different, but very often expanded states of consciousness, glimpses, mystical experiences, all the stuff that we would describe as extraordinary or mind-blowing, anything to do with the world of form, anything that is uncomfortable, anything to do basically with our human experience is kind of pushed away and rejected, and there can be a tendency not to want to deal with it, and there's a pull to just have those experiences because the reality of what is, or the reality of the ordinary life and all the things that we need to deal with is kind of disappointing and just and we don't want to deal with that. At the core of all those reasons really is just the sense of separation, is really just seeing the transcendent and the formless as separate from the form, from the human experience. And it has to do with really equating awakening with just nice feelings, and anything other than that, is seen as unawakened, or like it's got nothing to do with awakening. This is where there's such a difference between listening to teachers and people who have been on this journey for like at least 10 years, but I'm talking preferably 10, 20 years, something like that, and the people who've just had an awakening of any kind, no matter how profound, but it's still sort of fresh, like it's just happened, whether it's like a few months ago or a year ago, and so on, And I'm absolutely not saying that there isn't value in listening to those people, because actually there's such a beautiful freshness and clarity when that first insight, the first awakening happens, that actually listening to those people can be very helpful and very beneficial. That's why I have no problem with people sharing their insights and experiences, even when they're very fresh, because the pull to share this is just completely natural. It's also very much part of the process, right? I'm just saying that the trouble starts when this particular profound insight, especially if it's the first insight or first awakening, is seen as the arrival point and an end point. Like there's nothing else to see, nothing else to experience. And this is why you will often hear teachers who have been on this journey for 10, 20 years plus, you will hear stories of students, coming to a group gathering and saying, I've seen it all. I've experienced no self, or I've experienced unity consciousness, or I experience, whatever version of awakening they describe. The teacher will not only indulge in what they're sharing at all, but the teacher may be even kind of ruthless in sort of piercing that bubble they are in, and this idea that because they've had that insight, therefore they arrived. And while I'm absolutely not a big fan of that kind of ruthless approach to doing this, because I really don't think it's mostly needed. In fact, I think that really mature teachers who have been through all the stages and through all kinds of experiences, they recognize that this kind of claims of arrival can be premature because they've done it themselves. And so they have compassion for that too, and total understanding. And they will be able to point gently to the difference between those experiences and what I call the awakening with capital A. However, in some instances, especially if there is some kind of ego that's sort of an identity, an ego that develops around this particular insight, a bit of that kind of ruthless piercing of that bubble can actually be incredibly helpful and beneficial to the person, even though it doesn't feel nice it doesn't feel nice, in terms of experience. But basically what the teachers are trying to point to is the difference between all kinds of profound shifts and experiences that sort of come and go, that the phenomenal nature of those experiences fades away, and the actual quote unquote awakening with capital A. And I think that the difference can be pointed to without invalidating or dismissing someone's experience, not to mention the person themselves. There's a whole bunch of other reasons why the disappointment and disillusionment happen. But I think it's also really good to know that even that is part of the awakening process, and people tend to abandon basically spirituality and inquiry altogether, and that often tends to be actually a really, really great thing to do and really beneficial. I can certainly relate to the disillusionment and the disappointment with transcendence of any kind, which, even though it was such a painful experience, it actually led to meeting my human experience fully, and that was the start of all kinds of other profound shifts and experiences that happen as a result of basically meeting my human experience fully for the first time. So that's all I've got for you. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.